Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is 9:57. So hope everyone's doing good. It's Friday, TGIF. Pretty nice day. Well, I haven't been outside yet, but it looks pretty cold. But the snow, we had a pretty big. Well, it wasn't really much snow at all. It was just mainly a lot of rain, but enough to where the roads were pretty bad, and everything was canceled. So I had my third snow day of the year, 2025. So just kind of chilled out at home, went to the store, and I sat down and watched a movie that the other day I went to one of my favorite places, Apple House Video, and I rented a bunch of three new movies. One movie that I decided not to really do a show on. I might do a show on it. It was good. Uh, I don't know, like I tend to only do shows on on this channel about movies I'm just that I love, movies that I love, and movies that I'm fired up by. I did a show yesterday on a movie that I saw that was directed by Zoe Kravitz, only twice, and that movie came out of nowhere for me, and I it was my first time seeing it, and I really really like that movie, and so when I go to Opera House Video, that's usually where I go to kind of keep my finger on the pulse of new movies that are coming out. I most spend most of my time watching old school horror films and movies from the 70s and 80s is like where my brain's always at. And beyond that and before that, 60s and 50s and stuff. But I do love a lot of new movies. 2024 was an incredible year for horror films. So, but I try to stay contemporary. I'm a nerd that way. I try to. I don't watch trailers anymore, really, because they just give away too much, frankly. And I like to go into movies relatively cold. So, and now with the age that we live in with social media, you hear about things pretty quickly. You hear, you know, whether a movie turns out to be really great or not very good at all, you definitely hear buzz about it pretty quickly because of the internet. And that's good and bad, like anything. But with trailers, the studios have some kind of warped perception of, where this is a marketing tool to get people in the theaters to just, I don't know, tell the whole story through the trailer. So I try to stay away from trailers. Every now and then I will see them, and it's inevitable that I'm going to hear about a certain movie or whatnot, and that can be also good or bad. But you can still make that conscious decision to kind of stay away from that particular film, or I should say, information pertaining to that film, because I still find that for me, most of the time when I go into something pretty cold, I will it will usually be a really good experience. But sometimes you just it's unavoidable. I mean, big movies like say Long Legs that came out last year, and you know, especially Nosferatu. I mean, it's inevitable that these movies become somewhat of a phenomenon. So you're going to hear about it, and you're going to hear good things, and then maybe some very negative things about it. So, but today's show is on a movie that I was on the fence about talking about, just because. Well, I'll get into that more. But there was a new movie that came out in 2024, and it stars Frank Grillo, who is one of my favorite kind of action stars. He's done so many great movies. I mean, he's been in some of the Avenger movies, Captain America. He was in Winter Soldier. He's been in all kinds of action movies. He's in one of my favorite Purge films of all time. I'm a huge Purge franchise fan. It's one of my favorite modern day kind of franchise horror movie franchises. And I've seen him in so many movies. He's an incredibly prolific actor. And I also feel like he is somewhat underrated. I think he's actually, I mean, he's first and foremost, I mean, Frank Grillo is just kind of a badass. He's like, he does a lot of his own stunts. You know, he's got a big background in martial arts and also boxing. And he does a lot of his own stunt work. He's just got that star, presence. But I think he's actually, aside from those things, I think he's actually a really good actor. I think he can play lots of different roles, and I think he sometimes maybe gets overlooked for those things. But he's been in a wide range of films. He's been in like big Hollywood films, say like The Winter Soldier, the Purge films. But he's also does lots. He's been doing a lot of more like low budget kind of independent action sci-fi movies as of late. But so it's all over the place. But he is really prolific, and he's one of my favorites. So, and I kind of feel Frank Grillo is one of those actors that he can be in a movie that's not very good, but he is usually so awesome in it that it doesn't matter, and it will still make he will still make it like a worthwhile experience. I kind of feel the same way with Nicolas Cage, who I've talked a lot about, who is my favorite actor, pound for pound of all time. He can be in a turd of a movie, which is pretty rare. I mean, he hasn't. I can't really think of a movie that he's been in that's just been so horrible. And I think pretty much every film he's been in has been pretty good for the most part, with varying degrees, of course. But he can be in a movie, for instance, like that is a total turd, but he's just Nick Cage, and it will make for a great experience, at least in my thought process. So when I heard about this movie that's called Werewolves, which I'm going to be talking about today, I was like, oh, okay, Frank Grillo in a werewolves movie, and I actually heard that this movie was, and it actually is. It's very much, it's very very true. But I heard that this movie was basically a Purge rip off, but with werewolves and Frank Grillo. And just those two things, I'm like, okay, I'm into this. This is something I want to see. So werewolves are my favorite creatures or monsters in film. I love vampires and especially Dracula tales, but the werewolf monster for me is, I'm even more attracted to that. There's a lot less quality werewolf movies. They don't put them out, or at least there are a lot out, but there's only a few I think that are just really good. The Howling being probably my favorite werewolf movie. Silver Bullet is great. An American Werewolf in London, of course. There's a few that are really 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 good, and I just did a series of shows about Paul Naschy, who again is, I think he's done some of the greatest werewolf movies as well. But in comparison to the genre of vampires or Dracula, or this past year Nosferatu, it's small little pittance in comparison. I mean, there's so many more vampire movies, and there's a lot of very good ones. But with werewolf movies, there's a lot less movies, and some of them are not very good. but I've always been attracted to that creature, that monster, much more so. It's always been my favorite, more or less movie monster. So I was excited to see this movie, but I heard that this movie was not terrible, but was far from being great. So I almost saw this movie in the theater. It came out um I think Werewolves came out about around Thanksgiving time. I think it came out in November or December, early December. But it wasn't out apparently in the theater. It didn't have a big theatrical run, and then it went right to video or DVD or streaming. So I rented it the other night, and I was kind of wanting to see it in the theater, and then a couple of the YouTube guys that I watch had said it was okay or not very good. And so I was like, well, do I want to spend the money to go to the theater to see this? And probably not. This will be a movie I will just rent, eventually. There's always a series of those movies of where you're like, yeah, okay, you put it on the back burner and eventually you'll see it. That happened to me, which was crazy, and I was blown away by it because it ended up being one of the best movies of last last year, and I was shocked that it happened to me. But George Miller put out Furioso, the prequel to the Mad Max film that he had done, Fury Road. And initially, I was super excited about that movie, but then I heard that it wasn't very good. Um, and I had seen a couple of the trailers. Again, I'm almost kind of contradicting myself now, but and I lost interest. It was weird. I didn't end up going to see that movie. It went from one of the most anticipated movies to where I was like, ah. And I didn't see it in the theater, and it came out on DVD, Blu-ray, and I still hadn't seen it. And it was weird because I love George Miller. I love that series so much, and one of two of my really good friends saw it and said that it was kind of a masterpiece. So then I rented it and I was like blown away, and I kicked myself for not seeing it in the theater because it's that movie ended up being just as good as Fury Road, if not better. But with Werewolves, that's not the fucking case. This movie was, um, I well, so I watched it last night on DVD, and I got about 40 minutes into it, and it might have been a little bit less, but I got about 40 minutes into it, and I couldn't do it. I had to shut it off. It was painful, and yeah, and it was ended up being an experience of where I was like, I don't know even think it's necessarily a movie I want to even really talk about. Because I tend, for most of the time with this channel, I try to just, like I said in the beginning of the show, I try to talk about movies that I really love and that I think should get a lot of attention. I do have I do have shows on the channel where I do, you know, do thumbs down reviews for films that I have seen. Particularly, like any movie that I go to the theater to see, I will, whether it's great or whether I think it's great or it's not so great, I will do a review. But typically, I try to stay pretty positive on this channel. But I was like, well, I should talk about this movie because it was kind of atrocious and kind of a waste of time. And it was one of those movies where I'm like, the feeling that I got was that this was just like some kind of like a bad cheeseburger. It was like just a factory, some kind of corporate factory film that was just pumped out, that had two names attached to it, and we'll just throw it out there, and whatever. Maybe we'll make a few bucks, and that was it. Like, and yeah, this movie was so I don't know. It lacked almost everything of what I want to see in a horror film, and especially my favorite kind of monster film, a werewolf movie. And I don't know, I don't really know what they were thinking. And this movie's kind of odd because Lou Diamond Phillips, of all actors, is in this movie, and he plays this scientist. And the premise of this movie is it's essentially that. It's essentially a purge movie with werewolves. That's essentially what this movie is. There's nothing different. And it's about this like blood moon thing that happens every few years of where you have the mass population of where the moon infects everyone and they turn into werewolves. And people have to basically, protect themselves and defend for themselves. And from top to bottom, it's literally a purge movie, like a purge ripoff, but not in a good way, really. And this movie is marred down so terribly by CGI transformation sequences of these werewolves, and I can't stand it. It makes me angry. I don't understand, like, I don't understand the logic of I just feel like it's such a big fucking waste of money. Like, well, why even do this? And I don't think this movie made any money, as far as I know. I don't think it did anything. I do believe it did have a theatrical run, but I don't think this movie made a dime back, and I don't. And it's a weird movie because it feels. Well, initially it feels like kind of a big budget horror werewolf film, but then as you get into the movie, it's like it seems like they didn't have any money really for this movie. And the thing that sucks about this movie, that's the only way I can think about. That's the only way I can describe it, is that the kills in this film are just like just so underwhelming. Like there's no, I'm gonna see a werewolf movie. I want to see some people get teared up to shreds. I want to see some fucking lycanthropic, you know, massacres. I want to see some, I want to see some gore. Like I was expecting there to be at least a significant amount of gore in this film, and there's there's a little bit, but it's so um in comparison to my anticipation, it's like it's really minuscule and it's like just underwhelming. There's not really any gore. The cast of this movie, I mean, Frank Grillo's great, but it's hard to buy him. Like he plays this like scientist guy who's like also this like soldier. It's hard to it's hard to buy him as a scientist in this film. Lou Diamond Phillips is like the head of this science organization that basically feels that they've created this new kind of combatant technology to save people from becoming werewolves, and I think it's called moon screen or something, and it's some kind of new technology to to help people from. It's like a serum that people can get injected with where they will not turn into a werewolf when this blood moon comes out. And it's just like, it's just ridiculous. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. I will say it's kind of that part of it is kind of an interesting premise. Like, I was like, it opens up with this, like, because this movie starts where you're like, bam, go, you're in it. There's no, there's no lead up to what this virus is or why people are turning into werewolves, or there's no time to like get to know a couple of the characters in the beginning, and then it gradually goes into the story. It's like as soon as you press play, you're in the middle of the story, so there's no build up to anything. which I think was like, I mean, it could have been good if it was executed well, but ultimately, I think even in good movies, or I think in general for movies, like it's usually good to have a little bit of a degree of backstory or like an introduction to something, and to kind of like identify with a couple of characters in the beginning or something that's going on that you start caring about. You have empathy towards the characters, or you just care about them, and then you're kind of shifted into what the story is about. That usually works, because it allows you to kind of warm up into the story. But this doesn't do that. It's like bam, and sometimes in for certain horror films and whatnot that can work, where you're thrust directly into the situation. But I like it to be I like that. For me, it's about the pacing, and I prefer to have that. You know, I prefer to be brought into a movie that way. But that being said, that premise of this new serum that they invent, and the idea of that, and of this like worldwide pandemic of people turning into werewolves is interesting, and it is kind of a cool idea. But the execution of this idea is just like, I don't know, it's kind of a shit show. So, and the thing that's I guess kind of cool maybe, but about the film, and when it comes to the werewolf transformations, like again, the CGI I think for these transformations is I don't like it at all. I think it just looks like shit, and it just there's nothing about it that looks real. It just to me it just looks so artificial and so computer generated. But I guess kind of one of the cool things about it is that once the werewolves turn into werewolves, or these people turn into werewolves, it's kind of essentially guys in suits. And that's kind of cool, but I don't know. It's like I thought that was kind of cool, but it's so glaring when you watch it. It's so glaringly obvious, like that this is completely artificial, completely CGI based, and then it's a guy in a suit. I don't know. It's weird. I mean, I'm about that practical effect um, way of showing a monster. Like I love that kind of shit. But everything else around it, I just think I just thought was disappointing. Like again, the kills were really disappointing. Super underwhelming. This movie is not really gory at all, and it's so like once you get going, it's just like so generic. It's so generic and just so I don't know, standard. The dialogue is just like it feels like they just they shot they wrote the script when they were shooting this movie. I mean, it's just so paint by numbers. Once you get into the story and like the action sequences and all of these things, it's just like, oh man, like really. And as well as like there's like zero chemistry with any of the characters on the screen. Like if anything, they're kind of annoying and you kind of want to see them die. There's zero chemistry, and so you don't really give a shit about anybody on screen. There's no excitement. There's nothing to care about, and it's just this like hollow movie. And just like, man, what the hell? Like, I kind of think, is Frank Grillo that hard up for a movie that he's going to do this? Like this could have been really good. I saw a little trailer for this movie, and the trailer was actually really really good. and it's kind of suspenseful, and it literally is. The scene that they show in the trailer is, and I think it's a teaser trailer, is literally the only scene in the movie that has any ounce of suspense or, drama. Everything else is just like, okay, here we go. Oh, I'm surprised by that. That's scary. Or, oh, I didn't see that coming. So I don't waste your time with this movie. Yeah, disappointing to the core, and then some. I am so grateful I did not see this in the theater. Yeah, this movie pretty much is trash. So yeah, thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.